Hello and welcome to today's episode of Simple Business Dream Life with me, Emma Hine. You know that saying, it's lonely at the top? Well, today I want to explore that a little because I don't think it should be lonely at any stage of business. Yet so many are, even if they don't realise it. So when your business is growing, when things are moving, you've got clients, you've got money coming in, offers that are genuinely working their magic, there's an assumption from everybody else that you must have it all figured out. You've got business connections and you're seen in lots of different rooms, so you can't be lonely. And yet, for so many people at that stage, it can still feel surprisingly lonely. Not in the same way it did when you first launched your business, but something just isn't quite clicking in the way it used to. Your conversations are starting to feel different. You notice yourself holding back parts of what you actually want to say because you're not sure how it's going to land with people. Yes, you're surrounded by people, but you're not necessarily feeling met at the level you're operating at anymore. And because technically everything is fine, you don't always question it. You just keep going. You keep leading, deciding, showing up, doing what you've always done. But underneath that, there's often a bit more weight than there used to be. And I think this is where it gets really interesting because I don't actually believe the hardest part is the loneliness itself. I think the hardest part is what that experience is quietly creating for us over time. Because when you don't have the right spaces to think out loud and to be challenged and to have your ideas sharpened, everything stays internal. And when everything stays internal, it tends to build up. Often others can't see it because it looks like opening your laptop and avoiding the one decision you know you need to make. It looks like voice noting the same problem to 3 or 4 different people, hoping someone will finally say the thing that gives you the clarity. It looks like sitting in rooms, smiling and nodding while quietly thinking, I don't think these conversations fit me anymore. That kind of isolation is subtle, but it changes how you move. You spend longer sitting on decisions than you need to. You go back and forth on things that, if you had the right conversation, could be resolved in minutes. You start questioning things you used to feel really clear on, and it's confusing because it's not like you suddenly become incapable. If anything, you're far more experienced, far more capable than you've ever been. But your world hasn't grown at the same pace you have. And I know this so deeply because I've lived through it. One of the loneliest periods of my life was actually in my 7-figure business. And I know that might sound strange to people listening because from the outside it looked incredibly successful. Things were working, the business had grown. People probably assumed I felt proud of what I'd built. But internally, I felt completely disconnected from myself. It reached a point where I knew something needed to change. Deep down, I knew I couldn't continue building in a way I had been, but the weight of that decision was enormous. And the hardest part wasn't even making the decision itself. It was feeling like I had nobody I could talk to, nobody who fully understood the complexity of what I was carrying, nobody who understood what it feels like to walk away from something that looks so successful on paper. Nobody who could separate the revenue from the reality of how it actually felt to live inside that business every single day. So I continued carrying it alone. I kept showing up, performing, leading. But internally, I was exhausted from holding all of those thoughts on my own. And looking back now, I can see that isolation made everything feel heavier than it needed to be. And I can also see that it delayed the decision ridiculously much longer than it needed to be. Because when there's nobody around you who can hold space for the level of conversation you actually need, you start trying to process everything yourself. You go round in circles, you overthink everything, you delay decisions, you question yourself way more than necessary. Not because you're incapable, but because us humans are not designed to carry big decisions alone. And I think so many high performers are doing exactly that without even realizing it. Because when you're operating in isolation, your thoughts start to take on more weight than they should. They stop being ideas you can test and start feeling like conclusions you just have to work out how to solve. Your doubts start to feel logical. Your overthinking starts to feel like the responsible thing to do. Even your hesitation can start to feel like a strategy. And without the right people around you, there's nothing to interrupt that pattern. So, yes, you might feel alone, but more than that, you feel unchallenged. And at a certain level in business, that's actually the bigger problem because growth at that stage isn't coming from more information. You already know a lot. You already have the proof that you can deliver amazing results. What creates the shift at this stage is perspective. It's been in conversations where the way you think is challenged, not just validated. You don't need validation, you need challenge. Being the smartest person in the room, the one who looks like they have it all together, may sound like a good place to be. It feels comfortable. It can even feel like a sign that you're doing well. But if you're always in spaces where you're the one with the answers, where your thinking isn't being stretched, where no one is really challenging how you're operating, you end up reinforcing your current level rather than moving beyond it. And I think what happens for a lot of people at this stage is that they outgrow their environment, but they don't consciously replace it. So they build their next level in the same rooms that supported their last one. And over time, that's going to start feeling a bit off. Not because anything is particularly wrong, but because it's no longer enough for where you are going. And I think we need to give ourselves more permission to acknowledge that. Because outgrowing a room doesn't make you ungrateful. Wanting deeper conversations doesn't make you difficult. Needing support at a higher level certainly does not make you weak. It just means you're evolving, you're growing. And sometimes the next stage of growth isn't about building harder. It's about building differently with the right people around you. I had a moment where this really clicked for me. I was in a conversation with someone who was operating at a much higher level, and I could feel the difference almost immediately. Not in an intimidating way, but in a way that made me realize how much I had normalized my own way of thinking. They made decisions quickly. They didn't sit in the same loops I had been sitting in. And when I shared something I'd been overthinking, they reflected it back in a way that was so simple, it almost caught me off guard. There was no overanalysis, no complexity. There was just clarity. And I remember leaving that conversation thinking, I've been trying to think my way through this on my own. When actually, what I needed was to be in a different conversation. That one interaction shifted more for me than weeks of trying to figure it out by myself. And that's when it really hit home for me. At a certain point, it's not about accessing more strategies or more information. It's about who you're in the room with while you're building. So if you're listening to this and something is resonating, I want to make this really practical for you. I want you to take a moment and look at the spaces you're currently in. Whether that's your peers, your networks, your communities, even your day-to-day conversations. Are those spaces stretching you? Are they challenging how you think, how you operate, what you see as possible? Or are they mostly reflecting back what you already know? Neither is wrong. We need both, but they serve very different purposes. Then I want you to look at where you're still holding everything on your own. Where you're the one making the decisions, carrying the vision, supporting everyone else, but you don't have an equivalent space where you can bring that fully. Because that's often where the pressure builds without you even noticing it. And finally, be honest about where you might have outgrown something but stayed anyway. Not because it's wrong, but because it's familiar, because it worked for a previous version of you. Growth often requires a real level of honesty here. And from that place of honesty, the shift doesn't need to be complicated. It might simply be deciding that you're no longer available to do this level of business in isolation. It might look like stepping into a different room, having different conversations, putting yourself in spaces where you're not the one leading all the time, but where you're also being expanded. Because the right environment will do something that strategy on its own cannot do. It will sharpen your thinking. It will collapse time around your decisions. And it will show you blind spots in a way that feels supportive rather than overwhelming. And maybe, most importantly, it reminds you that you don't have to carry all of this alone just to prove you're capable, because you already are. You already have the proof for that. And your next level isn't asking you to prove that again. It's asking you to choose environments that support it. Because business was never supposed to become a place where you carry everything alone. And yes, there will be moments where people no longer understand your vision, your decisions, or the direction you're moving in. That's part of growth. But you still deserve spaces where you can be challenged, supported, expanded, and fully met in the season you're in right now, not the version of you people are used to. So if this episode has resonated, maybe this is your reminder that your next level isn't asking you to do more on your own. Maybe it's simply asking you to find the rooms, conversation, and people that grow with you too. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time.